The rain didn't fall, it attacked. It came down in heavy, sideways sheets, turning the cracked concrete of the Blue Ridge Parkway gas station into a mirror of swirling stormwater and distorted neon. I stood motionless beneath the flickering awning light, every inch of me soaked through, mascara bleeding down my cheeks like war paint gone wrong. The only sound louder than the pounding rain was the fading hum of Jake's BMW engine as his taillights vanished into the blur. He didn't look back. No pause. No hesitation. Just those last cold words before he shut the door. "I need space, Emily. I'm done." And then he drove off, 40 miles from home. No car. No coat. A broken umbrella. A dying phone. And a marriage that had evaporated in the middle of a storm. I didn't even notice I was shivering until I stepped inside the tiny convenience store. The sudden blast of fluorescent light felt like a slap. Harsh. Unforgiving. A teenage clerk behind the counter blinked at me, clearly trying to decide if I was a runaway bride or a soaked lunatic. "Ma'am, are you okay?" "Fine," I said, though my voice cracked halfway through. I wasn't fine. I was humiliated, abandoned, and trembling in a dress that now clung to my skin like a wet paper towel. There were 17 missed calls from the office, 3 messages from Matt, my brother, asking if I was safe, and not a single word from Jake. My husband of 8 years had just driven off into a storm and left me like I was luggage he'd forgotten on the curb. I leaned against the coffee machine, pretending to study the options. The ancient thing groaned and hissed like it might explode. I pressed a button anyway. The only thing worse than being left behind in the rain was doing it without caffeine. What really broke me wasn't the storm. It wasn't even the abandonment. It was how casual he'd been. Jake had finished his meal at that overpriced steakhouse, paid the bill, wiped his mouth with the linen napkin, and said it like he was canceling a gym membership. "This isn't working anymore. You'll figure your way home." I had laughed. Actually laughed. I thought he was joking, being dramatic. But when I followed him out of the restaurant, trying to keep up in heels, he just pointed across the street. "There's a gas station. You've got your phone." As if a phone would fix everything. As if I had anyone left to call. The truth was, I'd let him cut me off from everyone over the years. At first, it was subtle. He didn't forbid me from seeing my friends. He just always had something come up. A client dinner. A work emergency. He'd say things like, "You've been so tired lately, babe. Why don't we stay in instead?" And I always agreed, because I believed in us, until slowly my world shrank to just him, his friends, his family, his needs. And now, standing in a gas station at 9:42 p.m. in the middle of nowhere, I realized I had no one to call who could get to me in time. Matt lived 3 hours away. My parents were on a cruise in the Baltic Sea. My best friend from college had moved to Oregon. I was alone. I opened my banking app, thinking maybe I could call a rideshare, at least get back to Asheville, figure things out in the morning. But the number on the screen made my breath catch. $47.32. This morning, our joint account had over $3,000. Now it was nearly empty. I scrolled. A withdrawal for $2,000 at an ATM downtown, time-stamped at 4:47 p.m., right when Jake had stepped out for a quick call, while I was getting my nails done for our weekend romantic reset. He hadn't just left me. He'd cleaned me out. The rain was still coming down hard when the doorbell above the convenience store chimed again. I barely glanced up, just another traveler passing through. But then something in the air changed. The silence shifted. The teenage clerk stopped chewing his gum. And when I finally turned, I saw a man standing near the door, water dripping from the edges of his black windbreaker, eyes scanning the store with quiet calculation. Not panicked, not annoyed, just alert, like he was trained to spot things before they went wrong. It took me a second to recognize him. David Grant. I'd seen him once or twice at Jake's company holiday parties, always standing off to the side, not drinking, not talking much, just watching. Jake had introduced him once as a security guy we use for high-end jobs. David's eyes landed on me, and something in his expression shifted from polite detachment to immediate concern. He crossed the room in 3 slow, steady steps, careful not to startle me. "Mrs. Carter?" His voice was deep but calm. "Are you all right?" For a moment, I didn't know how to answer. The question was so simple, but no one else had bothered to ask it. Not Jake, not the waiter at dinner, not even myself. I tried to smile. Failed. My husband and I had a disagreement. David looked at me like I'd said I'd just walked away from a plane crash. His gaze swept over me. Soaked hair plastered to my neck, makeup smudged, hands trembling slightly around a cup of ancient coffee. "He left you here?" I nodded, my lips too stiff to speak. "In this storm?" Another nod. I hated how small I felt in that moment, how much effort it took just to stay upright. David's face tightened, but he said nothing. No gasps, no judgment, just silence. Heavy, protective. "Where do you need to go?" he asked finally. "Briarwood Hills," I whispered. "But I can't. My account's empty. I don't have a ride. And Jake," my voice cracked. I stopped. David took a slow breath, as if weighing options in his head. Then he spoke evenly. "Emily, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want you to know the answer stays between us. Are you in any danger?" That stopped me cold. I looked at him, really looked at him. There was no pity in his eyes, just awareness, readiness, like he was already planning next steps in his head depending on what I said. "No," I said too fast. Then again, slower. "No, Jake's not violent, just cruel." David nodded once, like that confirmed what he already suspected. Then he surprised me. "I can give you a ride home. No strings, no expectations. You're alone right now. You shouldn't be." Something in my chest cracked open, not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. No insistence, no savior complex, just calm, competent concern. I hesitated. My entire marriage had trained me not to accept help without asking Jake first. But Jake wasn't here. Jake had driven away and left me in the storm like trash on the sidewalk. "Thank you," I said quietly. "Yes, I'd appreciate that." David nodded again. "I'll grab some coffee. Take your time. Meet me outside when you're ready." As he turned, I saw the clerk shoot me a curious glance. I ignored it. Instead, I moved toward the door and caught sight of my reflection in the security mirror above the chips aisle. What I saw wasn't flattering. Wet, disheveled, defeated, but it was honest. This was what being discarded looked like. But also, maybe what being free looked like too. I stepped out into the rain again. This time I wasn't alone. David's truck was parked beneath the single flickering light in the lot, a black Ford F-150 that looked like it belonged to someone who expected bad things to happen and planned accordingly. The interior smelled faintly of leather and coffee, and it was immaculately clean. No clutter, no trash, not even a fingerprint on the dashboard. He reached over to open the passenger door for me without a word, then waited until I was settled and buckled in before starting the engine. Not once did he ask questions he didn't need to. Not once did he comment on the way my dress clung to my body or how I'd clearly been crying. He just drove. At first, the silence between us was thick, with everything I couldn't say. I watched the trees blur past, soaked and spectral in the headlights, and felt my heart beating like I was still standing under that gas station awning. Every minute felt like I was being peeled away from the version of me that had believed Jake would come back, that he'd had a bad moment, that this was some kind of mistake. But it wasn't. He'd planned it. The financial wipeout, the timing, the storm. All of it. After 10 minutes, David spoke. His voice was low and even. "I hope you don't mind me asking, but how long has this been going on?" I glanced at him. "This. The way your husband treats you." My throat tightened. I wanted to answer. To say he doesn't always treat me this way, or he's stressed from work, or it's complicated. But the words wouldn't come, because none of them were true. David continued, eyes on the road. I've done security work for a long time. You get good at spotting patterns, control, isolation, gaslighting. Jake's been laying the groundwork for this for a while. You probably know that. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The truth was already humming in the quiet space between us. At the company holiday party last year, David said, I saw him redirect every conversation you tried to have. Anytime someone showed interest in you, even just small talk, he'd insert himself, shift the focus, keep you orbiting him. I turned to look at him, stunned. I didn't notice, I said softly. You weren't meant to, he replied. We drove on. The wipers carved rhythm into the rain. He also told 3 people at that party, David added, that you were too trusting and needed him to keep an eye on things for you. Made it sound like a joke, but it wasn't. I closed my eyes. I remembered those moments. The way people laughed awkwardly and I'd brushed it off. I thought it was just Jake being charming in his offbeat way. He wasn't being charming. He was undermining me. You were watching me, I said, more surprised than accusing. David gave a small nod. I pay attention, especially when something doesn't feel right. He didn't elaborate, didn't need to, and somehow that made me trust him more than I'd trusted anyone in years. After a pause, he said, quietly, You reminded me of my sister, before she left her husband. The word left hit differently than I expected. Not escaped, not survived, just left, as if it were a decision she'd made, not something she'd had to be rescued from. He ever hit you? David asked, not prying, just verifying. No, I answered honestly. Never. That doesn't mean it wasn't abuse. I turned toward the window, blinking fast. He wasn't trying to make me cry, but that was what made it worse. He was just telling the truth. And I wasn't used to the truth feeling like a kindness. Emily, he said finally, whatever happens next, you need to think about protecting yourself. Financially, legally, because men who abandon their wives in storms usually have a lot more plan than just walking away. That last line echoed in my chest long after he said it. Because he was right. Jake hadn't just left me. He was erasing me. But I wasn't going to let him. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of clarity that only follows a storm. The sunlight filtered through the blinds in stripes, casting golden bars across the hardwood floors. It should have been a peaceful scene, but my mind was already racing the moment I opened my eyes. I was still in the guest bedroom. I hadn't gone near the master suite. Couldn't stand the thought of sleeping in the same sheets Jake had abandoned me from. The clothes I wore were borrowed from the back of my closet, old college sweatpants, and a faded hoodie that still smelled like fabric softener and another life. But I wasn't the same person who stood in that gas station the night before. Something had shifted. Something sharp and cold and clean had sliced through the fog I'd lived in for years. And I knew exactly who I needed to call. Rachel Evans picked up on the second ring. Emily? Wow, it's been forever. I didn't waste time. Rachel, I need a lawyer. And I need one fast. There was a pause. Then her tone changed instantly. Cool, focused, razor sharp. Are you in danger? No, but my husband left me 40 miles from home in the middle of a storm. He drained our accounts. I found evidence that he's been planning this for months. And I have no idea what else he's taken. Another pause. Then, don't leave your house. I'm coming to you. She arrived an hour later, still in yoga pants and a zip-up hoodie, hair in a messy bun, but with the expression of someone who'd taken down bigger men than Jake Carter before breakfast. She brought a leather portfolio, a tablet, and an energy that made me feel like, for the first time in this nightmare, someone was truly on my side. Show me everything, she said without preamble. I walked her through it all. The empty closet where Jake's suits had once been. The missing duffel bag. The jewelry box with my grandmother's ring gone. The email draft I found in the trash folder on his computer, clinical and cold, outlining how the separation would be mutually beneficial for personal growth. And most importantly, the bank transactions. Rachel's brows lifted as she scrolled through my phone. He withdrew $2,000 the same afternoon he left you stranded. Did he mention anything about splitting accounts? No, I didn't even know he was thinking about leaving. She sat back, arms crossed. Then he's in trouble. My heart fluttered. What do you mean? In California, and yes, we'll confirm this applies in North Carolina too, marriage is a legal partnership. You can't just start funneling money away, hiding assets, and planning an escape while pretending to still work on the relationship. That's called dissipation of marital assets, and judges do not like it. She flipped through her tablet, pulling up state legal codes, explaining terms like community property, forensic discovery, and temporary spousal relief. It was like watching someone assemble a weapon out of legal precedent and case law. I couldn't stop staring. I feel like I've been sleepwalking for years. Rachel gave me a look. You weren't sleepwalking. You were surviving someone else's reality. And now you're about to take yours back. She paused, looking around the house. Is this place in both your names? Yes. Good. Don't move out. If he tries to return, we'll file for exclusive use. But you stay. This is leverage. We freeze the assets. We secure everything you can. You make copies of every document in this house, and I'll start building a timeline. I nodded slowly. He told me last week that this trip was to fix things. He booked the hotel, planned everything. Rachel raised an eyebrow. Then he wasn't just walking away. He lured you out of town so he could finish setting the trap. That truth landed like a punch. He hadn't just ended a marriage. He'd orchestrated a disappearance, mine. But I wasn't gone yet. And now I had someone who knew how to fight. Monday morning arrived like a spotlight, harsh, exposing, and impossible to ignore. I stood outside the Buncombe County Courthouse, spine straight, heels planted, flanked by Rachel on one side and Matt on the other. My brother wore a black jacket and a jaw locked so tight it looked like stone. Rachel had on a navy pantsuit and the kind of no-nonsense heels that said she wasn't here to negotiate, she was here to win. As for me, I wore the most professional outfit I owned. Clean lines, high collar, no jewelry, no distractions, just me, holding myself together with the same hands Jake had tried to make useless for years. Are you ready? Rachel asked, her voice low. No, yes, I said. Inside, the courthouse buzzed with hushed voices and the dull clatter of shoes on tile. I spotted Jake before he saw me. He sat beside his attorney, a tall man with silver hair, custom tailoring, and the kind of polished arrogance that screamed retainer fee. Jake wore the same Rolex he swore he'd pawned last year to pay off business expenses. His face was composed, clean-shaven, calculated. And when he saw me, he smiled, like none of this was real, like we were two adults resolving a misunderstanding, not adversaries in a legal war. He'd started the night he left me in the rain. Don't look at him, Rachel whispered as we took our seats. Every glance is an invitation. You're not here to talk. You're here to win. The judge entered, Honorable Margaret Chin, stern, concise, with a reputation for cutting through theatrics like a scalpel. I liked her instantly. The hearing began. Rachel stood first, presenting our emergency petition to freeze all marital assets, grant me exclusive use of the home, and secure immediate temporary support. She walked the court through the timeline, Jake booking the reconciliation trip, Jake draining $2,000 from the joint account hours before dinner, Jake abandoning me 40 miles from home with no transportation, no cash, and no notice. Then she submitted the email draft. Even Jake's lawyer shifted in his seat. Rachel spoke with surgical precision. Calm, controlled, ruthless. When it was their turn, Jake's attorney attempted to soften the blow. Your Honor, this was a mutual decision. My client acted out of emotional distress. There was no financial intent to defraud, merely poor timing. The withdrawal was standard business usage, and the departure was a result of a reconcilable marital strain. Judge Chin didn't blink, and yet he left her without funds, without warning, and without means of transportation in inclement weather. Do I have that right, counselor? Jake's lawyer tried to redirect. Judge Chin shut it down. Answer the question. There was a beat of silence. Then Jake stood up. Your Honor, he began, with that practiced voice he used in investor meetings. Emily and I have been struggling for months. We agreed that space might help us gain clarity. I didn't intend for her to feel abandoned. I thought she'd be able to call a friend, a rideshare. I miscalculated. Miscalculated, the judge repeated, her voice flat. Yes, ma'am. And the funds, she asked. Jake hesitated, just a second too long. They were business-related, he said finally. Rachel stood. We request proof of that, Your Honor. Receipts, transfers, any documentation that shows that withdrawal was related to company use and not personal liquidation. You'll get it, Judge Chin said, already scribbling on her notes. Then she looked back at Jake. Mr. Carter, abandoning one's spouse under the circumstances described and draining shared accounts does not paint you in a favorable light. I am granting the petition. All joint assets are frozen pending forensic review. Mrs. Carter will retain use of the marital residence and receive temporary spousal support in the amount of $4,000 per month until we determine the full financial picture. Jake's composure cracked for a brief second, just enough for me to see the flicker of rage behind his eyes. Good. He thought he was going to walk away with everything. The money, the house, the version of the story he'd been telling everyone. But today, for the first time, he was being held accountable. And I wasn't the woman who used to make excuses for him anymore. Jake called that same night. I let it ring 4 times before answering on speaker, with Matt seated across the room, arms folded, watching like a hawk. Emily, Jake's voice came through the phone, tight and rehearsed. What the hell do you think you're doing? No hello. No pretense. I'm exercising my rights, I said calmly. He exhaled sharply. You had to humiliate me? In court? In front of my attorney, my investors? Do you even realize the damage you've done? You mean the damage you did? I replied, by abandoning your wife in a rainstorm with no money and lying about her finances for years. There was a pause, then his voice softened, shifted, like it always did when he needed to pull me back in. Look, we both made mistakes. I'll admit I didn't handle things well, but dragging this through court isn't going to help either of us. You're angry, I get that. Let's meet somewhere, talk things through like adults. Leave the lawyers out of it. Matt made a slicing motion across his throat. Don't answer that. I didn't. Instead, I said, all communication goes through Rachel now. If you have something to say, you can say it through her. Jake's voice hardened again. Don't be stupid. You think she actually cares about you? She wants your case to drag on. She gets paid more the longer this takes. You really think she's helping you? I stared at the phone. At the image of him, I could still conjure, without effort, the suit, the charm, the condescension. She's helping me more than you ever did. Emily, he said, that dangerous softness returning, this doesn't have to be ugly. It already is, I replied. And I didn't make it that way. You did. Click. I placed the phone face down on the coffee table. My hands were steady. My voice had held, but my heart was pounding in my ears. You handled that like a champ, Matt said. Didn't flinch. Didn't let him in. I'm impressed. I used to fall for that voice, I admitted. The way he twisted everything to sound like I was overreacting or misunderstanding or being emotional. Matt's face darkened. That's not charm. That's manipulation. He was right, but Jake wasn't done. The next afternoon, someone rang the doorbell. Matt checked the peephole first, then groaned. Oh, for Emily. It's your mother-in-law. I didn't need to ask which one. Linda Carter, polished as ever, wrapped in a trench coat like she'd just stepped out of a country club commercial. In her hands, a box of cookies. You sure you want to open that door? Matt asked. I paused, then opened it, but left the chain on. Emily, sweetheart, Linda said in her softest, most matriarchal tone. I was just passing through and thought I'd drop these off. Your favorite, the lemon almond ones. I don't think this is a good time, Linda, I said, voice neutral. She smiled, tight and strained. I understand things are tense, but we're still family. We love you. Rob made some mistakes, yes, but this legal situation? It's hurting everyone. There it was. Not even 30 seconds in, and the guilt trip had already begun. He hurt himself, I replied. I'm just responding. Linda glanced past me into the house. This isn't who you are, Emily. You've always been level-headed, reasonable. This vendetta doesn't suit you. I almost laughed. Holding someone accountable isn't a vendetta. It's self-respect. She sighed. Think about Tyler's college fund, Rob's employees, his reputation. If you take this too far, it could destroy everything. I stared at her. The woman who had once called me family was now reminding me how inconvenient I'd become. Not once did she say what Jake did was wrong. Not once did she ask if I was okay. I'm protecting myself, I said. Something I should have started doing a long time ago. I just thought maybe you didn't need all that money, she said quietly. You're smart, independent. You'll bounce back. And Jake won't. Her smile cracked. I closed the door. Matt looked at me, eyebrows raised. That was like watching a lioness ignore a chihuahua. I managed a weak laugh, but inside, something much stronger than laughter was rising. Resolve. They were going to push. Jake, Linda, their lawyer, maybe even mutual friends. But I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of who that made me. 3 weeks later, the truth arrived, not as a rumor or suspicion, but as a thick folder laid across my kitchen table by Rachel herself. Sit down, she said, lips curled in something that resembled a smile, but not quite. It was the look of a lawyer who had just found the knife someone used to stab her client in the back, complete with fingerprints and a signed confession. What you're about to read, she said, tapping the folder, is going to make your blood boil. But it's also going to put you in the strongest negotiating position I've seen in years. I sat. The top page was an executive summary from the forensic accountant she'd hired. One phrase jumped out immediately. Undisclosed marital assets exceeding $12.4 million. I blinked. He always said the business was barely staying afloat, I whispered. Rachel nodded grimly. Turns out Carter Design and Build wasn't just doing okay. They secured a state contract 3 years ago, $40 million over 5 years for infrastructure renovations. And that's just the surface. She flipped the pages. I saw property deeds, investment accounts, wire transfers to offshore holdings in the Cayman Islands, and 2 shell companies registered under names I didn't recognize until I saw the initials. SB, Sophie Blake. He wasn't just hiding money. He was building a future without me. There's a house in Arizona, Rachel said, turning the page. Bought in cash. A condo in Miami under a shell corporation. A Tesla registered to a company Sophie opened last year. And guess who paid the insurance on it? My throat tightened. Let me guess. Your joint checking account. I felt something in my chest snap, not break, not shatter, but sever. The last frayed string, holding me to the fantasy of who Jake had once been. It gets worse, Rachel added. He's been preparing for this for over 2 years. Timing purchases around when you were less likely to check the accounts, hiding documents in encrypted cloud storage, and, get this, drafting a full asset separation agreement under your name. Forged. My jaw clenched. He forged my signature. Tried to. It wouldn't have held up in court, but if you hadn't contested the divorce, if you'd agreed to mediation quietly, he would have slipped it through. I stared at the pages, feeling heat rise in my chest. This wasn't just betrayal. It was strategic, calculated theft. He thought I'd roll over, I said. Rachel leaned back. Because he trained you to. She wasn't wrong. We spent the next hour building a response. By the time we were done, Rachel had drafted a counterproposal so precise, so unflinching, that even I flinched reading it. That Monday, we walked into the downtown firm where Jake and his attorney were waiting. All cool air conditioning and cold espresso in glass tumblers. Jake stood when I entered. He looked thinner, paler, like the stress had started gnawing at the edges. Emily, he began, that soft voice back in play. I think we can resolve this amicably if we both. I raised my hand. Save it. Rachel placed our file on the table. This is our position. Full disclosure of all assets. A 50-50 division of everything acquired during the marriage, plus retroactive spousal support and full legal fees covered by Mr. Carter. Jake's attorney scoffed. That's outrageous. Rachel smiled politely. It's law. They offered a counter. $200,000. A non-disclosure agreement. The Pinewood Hills house. I almost laughed. Jake had spent 2 years stealing millions, and now he wanted to buy my silence with barely enough to cover a year's rent in Asheville. You're offering me $200,000, I said slowly, to walk away from a marriage where you hid over $12 million in joint assets and left me in the rain like roadkill. Jake leaned forward, voice low. Most of that isn't liquid. It's tied up in business. Then you shouldn't have stolen it. Rachel didn't even blink. We'll see you in court. Jake's face changed. The confident smirk faded. His shoulders sank. He glanced at his attorney, who was suddenly much less smug. We stood to leave. Emily, Jake said louder this time, you don't have to do this. We can figure something out. Just you and me. I turned, held his gaze. The person I used to be? I said. She would have listened. She would have negotiated. But she drowned in a gas station parking lot 3 weeks ago. And this version of me? She doesn't take crumbs. The final hearing was brief, clinical, and brutal. Judge Chin read the ruling with the precision of a surgeon. Jake Carter was found guilty of concealing marital assets, forging financial documents, and attempting to defraud his spouse. The court awarded me 60% of all declared and discovered assets, full ownership of the marital residence, and an additional $500,000 in punitive damages. Jake didn't say a word. He sat with his lawyer, face pale, hands clasped tightly in his lap. When the judge declared the ruling final and binding, he didn't even flinch. Just stared straight ahead like if he didn't move, maybe none of it would be real. But it was. And it was over. Rachel and I walked out of that courthouse into bright spring sunlight. The world hadn't changed, but I had. 3 weeks later, the checks cleared. The house was mine officially. His name stripped from the deed. The mortgage paid off by court order. The title transferred into mine, and mine alone. The first thing I did, repainted the front door. Forest green. The color of peace. The color of new beginnings. Then I called Matt. I want to talk about the nonprofit, I said. He laughed. I was wondering when you'd bring that up again. We sat on my back porch for hours that night, brainstorming. Not revenge, not bitterness, just a mission. To create a fund for women leaving controlling or financially abusive relationships. A way out, legal help, housing, a voice. We called it Project Rainlight, because that's when I was reborn. In the rain, left behind, alone, and then picked up, not just by a bodyguard, but by the version of myself I didn't even know was waiting. David, my former bodyguard, now friend, joined as head of security and logistics. Rachel offered free legal consultation for first-time clients. Matt set up the tech infrastructure. We launched quietly but confidently. No headlines, no big PR push. Just story after story of women escaping, surviving, reclaiming. One afternoon, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a photo. Jake, looking haggard, standing outside a rental property in Scottsdale. Scribbled across the back were 6 words. You were never supposed to win. I almost threw it away, but instead, I slipped it into the file marked legal closed. Because he was the storm, but I'd learned how to dance in it. 6 months later, Project Rainlight received its first state grant. We expanded into 3 counties, hired for more attorneys, and opened our first transitional housing unit. On the wall inside that small white building is a frame, my original court order. Not to brag, not to gloat, but to remind every woman who walks through that door, you don't need to be fearless, you just need to be done.